this does not smell right. So some people are saying, Reverend, are y'all bringing in race? Well, we're not bringing in race, but we're not discounting race either, because we don't know what it is. So to tell us don't rush to judgment saying it was racist is fine. But then I'm telling you, don't rush to judgment saying it was not racist.
The boat is already moving. The engine is running. The water is choppy. And somewhere behind them, still standing on that island, is an 18-year-old kid who came with the group. But he is not going back with it. Nobody turned around. Nobody went back. And by the time anyone thought to ask where he was, Horn Island was 10 miles behind them, the sun was starting to drop, and Nolan Wells was gone. This is not a story about a simple accident. This is a story about a young man who trusted his people, got on a boat on the 4th of July, and never came home. This is the full story of what happened to Nolan Wells, and how the people who were supposed to bring him back left him behind. Stay with me, because this one is going to shake you. And before we go any further, if you are new here, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell right now. This channel covers true crime cases that demand attention, cases that deserve to be told, cases where real families are waiting for real answers. You do not want to miss a single one. Subscribe, turn on notifications. Let's go. Nolan Xavier Wells grew up in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, a small coastal town that sits right along the Gulf, the kind of place where everybody knows your name and Friday nights belong to high school football. Ocean Springs is the kind of town that takes pride in its own. And Nolan Wells was exactly the kind of kid a town takes pride in. He was 18 years old, a wide receiver, a recent graduate of Ocean Springs High School, and a newly enrolled student athlete at Southwest Mississippi Community College, ready to take his game to the next level. His coaches described him the way you describe a young man who has figured out something most teenagers haven't: quiet, steady, a leader not by volume, but by example. He didn't need to be the loudest person in the room. He just needed to show up, do the work, and do it right. And that is exactly what he did, every single time. 6 feet 1 inch tall, 180 pounds. A smile that showed up in photos the way it must have shown up in real life. Easy, genuine, like he had nothing to prove and everything to give. The night before everything changed, Nolan was home. It was July 3rd, 2026, the evening before the 4th of July, and instead of being out somewhere, Nolan Wells was in the kitchen. He cooked salmon for his parents. Christine Wansley and Elmore Wansley sat with them, spent time with them. Then he got ready to leave for a friend's house, the way any 18-year-old would on the night before a holiday. But before he walked out that door, he stopped. He hugged his mother, he kissed her, he looked at her and said, "I love you, Mom." Then he left. Christine Wansley would replay that moment over and over in the days that followed. That hug, those words, the way he said them, not rushed, not distracted. Like he meant it completely. There was something else Nolan grew up knowing. A rule in the Wansley household that Elmore had drilled into his son from the time he was old enough to understand it. Simple, non-negotiable. If you go with a group, you come back with that group. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a principle. A foundation. The kind of thing a father teaches his son because the world is unpredictable and the people around you are supposed to be your safety net. Nolan knew that rule. He lived by it. And on July 4th, 2026, that rule would become the most devastating detail of his entire story. The morning of July 4th started the way a lot of summer holiday mornings start along the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Warm, bright, with the smell of salt water in the air and the sound of boats launching off every dock from Biloxi to Pascagoula. It was a holiday. People were celebrating. The Gulf was calling. Nolan's group departed from a private dock in the Ocean Springs area at 9:56 a.m. Their destination was Horn Island, a remote barrier island sitting roughly 10 miles off the Mississippi Gulf Coast, part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore. If you've never heard of Horn Island, here's what you need to understand about it. There are no roads on Horn Island. There are no bridges. There are no stores, no restaurants, no cars, no emergency services you can walk to. The only way in is by water. The only way out is by water. It is beautiful and it is isolated. And on a holiday like the 4th of July, it becomes a destination. Dozens of boats anchoring along the shoreline, people setting up in the sand, music playing, coolers open, flags flying. GPS data from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources later confirmed the boat arrived at Horn Island at 11:14 a.m. The island was buzzing. Vessels lined the shore. Nolan was there, with his friends, on what was supposed to be a straightforward holiday outing. Photos taken earlier that day tell a simple story. Nolan, smiling, his arm casually around someone's shoulder, happy, relaxed. No sign of anything wrong, no tension in his face, no distance in his eyes. Just a young man on a warm summer day, celebrating with people he knew. His last confirmed sighting was around 3 p.m. near the northwest tip of the island. Blue swim trunks, no shirt, sunglasses, standing on a barrier island 10 miles from the nearest road, with one way home. One way home. Around 4 p.m., something went wrong with the boat. It started taking on water. The group made the call to leave early, cut the day short, get back to the mainland before the situation got worse. Reasonable decision, understandable call. What happened next is where this story stops making sense. An audio recording was later obtained by investigators. In it, one of the teenagers on the trip is heard calling a private towing company. The caller tells the towing company that the vessel is sinking. And then, and this part matters, the caller specifically confirms that everyone on board is in good health. Everyone is fine. The boat departed Horn Island at 4:31 p.m. Nolan Wells was not on it. Let that sit for a second. The boat is sinking, or at least taking on water badly enough to call a towing company, and the group leaves the island without every person who arrived on it. According to statements later made by the friends and comments from Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter, Nolan had chosen to stay behind. The explanation given was that he planned to get a ride back to the mainland with another group on the island. One account mentioned he wanted to talk to a girl he had seen there. That was the explanation. He chose to stay. On a remote barrier island with no roads, no bridges, no emergency services, 10 miles from shore, with a boat that was taking on water and needed to leave, they left an 18-year-old behind on the word that he'd find another way home. The boat reached Fort Bayou at 5:52 p.m. It was back at the dock by 6:06 p.m. By that time, the vessel had been trailered and driven to its owner's home in Biloxi. No one called for help. Not at 4:31, not at 5:52, not at 6:06. The boat went home. The day, apparently, was over. Nolan Wells was still out there. Where are you watching from right now? Seriously, drop your city and state in the comments. And while you're down there, tell me, what time is it where you are? What's the weather like? I want to know who's watching this story with me tonight, because what I'm about to tell you next, a mother going through her son's phone at midnight, this part right here is the part that stays with you. The hours after the boat docked were quiet in the worst possible way. No call, no check-in, no, hey, did Nolan make it back? By 11 p.m. on July 4th, a friend reached out to the U.S. Coast Guard to report that Nolan was missing. The Coast Guard reviewed the situation and determined it did not meet the threshold for an immediate search and rescue deployment. They did not launch that night. Just after midnight, Christine Wansley picked up the phone herself and called the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. She wasn't going to wait. She wasn't going to sit at home and hope for the best while her son was somewhere out on the water, or worse, somewhere on that island, in the dark. She filed the report, and then she turned to social media. She posted a plea. She asked for prayers. She asked anyone who knew anything, anyone who had seen her son, anyone who could help, to come forward. A mother, in the middle of the night, typing into the internet because the official channels had already told her it wasn't urgent enough. Then came the phone. A friend had been tracking Nolan's location through Snapchat and managed to locate his phone at a house where multiple people were gathered. Christine went and retrieved it herself. She held her son's phone in her hands and she started going through it. And what she found, or more precisely what she didn't find, stopped her cold. No photos from the island, no videos, nothing. For anyone who knew Nolan, this was immediately wrong. He documented things. He took photos the way most 18-year-olds do. Casually, habitually, almost automatically. On a holiday trip to an island with friends on the 4th of July, you'd expect a camera roll full of moments. Sand, sun, fireworks, friends. But there was nothing. The phone looked clean. Too clean. And then there was the location data. His Life 360 showed one location. His Snapchat showed something different. 2 apps, 2 answers, neither one adding up. Christine Wansley sat there holding that phone in the middle of the night on July 5th, and she knew that the version of events she was being told was not the full story. At first light on July 5th, the search began in earnest. The Jackson County Sheriff's Department took the lead and called in every resource available: the U.S. Coast Guard, the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the National Park Service, and the United Cajun Navy, the volunteer search and rescue organization that has become one of the most reliable forces in Gulf Coast emergencies. Search grids were drawn up. Water and land were both covered. Boats went out. Teams combed the island on foot. Christine Wansley did not stay home and wait. She went to Horn Island herself, a mother on that remote barrier island, searching for her son alongside trained professionals, walking the same sand where Nolan had stood the afternoon before, calling out, looking, refusing to stop. The search ran through July 5th and into the night. It continued into July 6th, hour after hour, no sign of Nolan. And then, on the morning of July 6th, at approximately 8:45 a.m., a National Park Service ranger made a heartbreaking discovery in the water off the western tip of Horn Island. The search was called off shortly after. The Jackson County Coroner's Office used dental records and DNA testing to make the formal identification. It was Nolan Xavier Wells. An autopsy was conducted at the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office. Toxicology results and the official cause of death were listed as pending at the time of the initial reports. Sheriff John Ledbetter stated publicly that, based on the information available to investigators at the time, there was no indication of anything other than an accidental drowning. That was the initial lean. That was the direction the official statement pointed. The family had a very different response. If this story matters to you, and I believe it does because you are still here, hit that like button right now. Just one tap. It takes 1 second. And every single like helps this video reach more people, which means more eyes on Nolan's story, more pressure on the people with answers, more light on a case that deserves it. Hit it. Thank you. On July 7th, 2026, one day after Nolan was found, 3 days after he was left on that island, his family retained civil rights attorney Ben Crump. If you know anything about high-profile cases involving families demanding accountability, you know that name. Ben Crump does not get involved in cases where everything is straightforward. He gets involved when families are being told to accept an explanation that doesn't hold up, and the Wells and Wansley family was not accepting the explanation they had been given. Crump moved quickly. He arranged for an independent autopsy to be conducted in Washington, D.C., separate from the state examination, with independent medical professionals, funded in part by a public donor. The family also sat down with Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath, pushing for full transparency and a seat at the table in this investigation. They requested a mutual inspection of Nolan's cell phone, both sides bringing in their own experts to examine the device together and account for everything on it, or everything that might have been removed from it. And Crump began talking publicly about what the family saw as contradictions, inconsistencies in the accounts being given by the people who were on that island with Nolan. The explanations for why Nolan stayed behind kept shifting. First it was that he chose to stay. Then it was that he planned to ride back with another group. Then came the mention of a girl he wanted to talk to. The details changed depending on who was telling the story and when they were telling it. And beyond the shifting explanations, there were reports, accounts that investigators were actively looking into, of a confrontation on the island. A heated exchange, something that happened in the hours before the boat left. Then a video surfaced on social media, audio of yelling, captured somewhere on the island that day. Some people who heard it believed the voice belonged to Nolan. The family heard it and had questions. One of Nolan's friends, Tristan Shepard, later came forward and stated that the voice in that video was his own, not Nolan's. But the video had already spread, and it had already raised a question that would not go away. What exactly was happening on the northwest tip of Horn Island in the hours leading up to 4 p.m.? Investigators issued a public appeal. They needed original, unedited photos and videos from July 4th on Horn Island. Anything showing what happened on the northwest side. Anything showing Nolan. Anything capturing a dispute, a disturbance, or unusual activity. They asked anyone who had been on that island that day to come forward with what they had. Unedited. Original files. Not screenshots. Not clips sent through social media. The actual footage. As of mid-July 2026, that search for original footage was still ongoing. There is a detail in this case that has been discussed publicly, and it needs to be addressed carefully and factually, because it matters. Look at the photos from that boat trip. The photos that exist, the ones that have been shared. Nolan Wells is the only black person in the group. His family acknowledged this. His community acknowledged this. The knockup called for a thorough and transparent investigation. Supporters raised the question of whether Nolan's race played any role in the way the situation unfolded, whether it affected the decisions made when the boat left, whether it affected the speed of the initial response, whether it affects how seriously the official narrative is being scrutinized. Sheriff Ledbetter acknowledged publicly that the speculation existed online. He emphasized that the investigation had to be driven by facts, by eyewitness accounts, by physical evidence, by what the data actually shows. And that is fair. That is how an investigation should work. But the family and their attorney were making a different point. Not that the answer was already known, but that the questions were not being asked aggressively enough. That the bar for nothing unusual here was being set too low. That an 18-year-old being left alone on a remote island and turning up in the water 2 days later deserved more than a preliminary lean toward accident and a pending toxicology report. And the people who loved Nolan Wells kept coming back to the same thing. The thing his father taught him. The thing the family believed in. You go with your group. You come back with your group. Nolan knew that rule. His father had made sure of it. And so the question that sat at the center of everything, the question that Christine Wansley and Elmore Wansley woke up with every single morning after July 4th, was not just what happened on that island. It was, why did they leave without him? Who made that call? And does the explanation they gave make any sense at all? The support that poured in told you how many people were asking the same questions. Tyler Perry reached out and offered support to the family. A GoFundMe campaign was launched for funeral expenses and the cost of the independent investigation. Within days, it surpassed $205,000, people from across the country contributing because the story of Nolan Wells had reached them and would not let them go. Funeral services were scheduled for July 20th, 2026. Christine Wansley called it a homegoing celebration, a service followed by a gathering at the Jackson County Fairgrounds. She was going to send her son home the way he deserved, surrounded by love, surrounded by people who knew exactly who he was. Let me tell you who Nolan Wells was. Not the case number, not the missing person report, not the name in the headline. The person. His high school coach described him as happy-go-lucky, the kind of young man who made practice better just by being there. Respectful. Genuinely, not performatively. The kind of respect that comes from how you were raised and who you decided to be. Loved by teammates, loved by staff. The kind of player coaches talk about years after the season ends because of what he brought to the room, not just to the field. Southwest Mississippi Community College remembered him as an exemplary student-athlete. He had gotten into college. He had a position on the team. He had a future with shape and direction and possibility. He was not drifting. He was building. Christine Wansley called her son a special soul. She said he uplifted people, not in a showy way, not in the way that demands recognition. Just quietly, consistently, the way people with real character do it. You left a conversation with Nolan feeling a little better than when it started. That's a rare thing. That's not something you can fake. Elmore Wansley remembered teaching his son the rules of the world, the principle about staying with your group, the understanding that the people you go out with are responsible for each other. He taught his son that, and his son believed it. And somewhere on Horn Island on July 4th, 2026, the people Nolan trusted with that principle made a choice. Nolan Wells would have turned 19 in August. 19 years old, second year of college ball on the horizon, a mother who cooked beside him, and a father who taught him, and coaches who watched him grow, and teammates who called him a leader. A young man who hugged his mother before he walked out the door and said, "I love you," like he meant every syllable of it. He went to celebrate a holiday. He went with a group. He should have come home. As of mid-July 2026, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office was still actively investigating the disappearance and passing of Nolan Wells. The investigation remained open. Witnesses were still being sought. Original unedited media from July 4th on Horn Island was still being requested by investigators. The independent autopsy results commissioned by the family had not yet been released. The questions that Christine and Elmore Wansley were living with, the questions they had demanded answers to from the moment they got that phone call, remained unanswered. Why did the accounts of why Nolan stayed behind keep changing? What happened on the northwest tip of Horn Island between 3 p.m. and 4:31 p.m.? What is on that phone, or what was on it before it ended up at that house in someone else's hands? Why did the location data not match between two different apps? What happened in the moments before the boat left? Someone on that island knows more than they have said publicly, possibly multiple people. And the family of Nolan Wells, his mother who kissed him goodbye on the night of July 3rd, his father who taught him to stay with his group, they are not stopping. They hired an attorney. They arranged an independent autopsy. They sat down with the district attorney. They went to the island themselves. They are doing everything in their power to make sure that the full truth of what happened to their son is brought into the open. The investigation continues. The results are pending. The story is not over, and that is exactly why it needs to be told. If you made it this far, I need you to do something. Leave a comment right now. What do you think happened on that island? What part of this story is not sitting right with you? Be respectful, be thoughtful, but be honest. The comment section is where this community processes cases like this together, and your perspective matters. Drop it below, and if you are not subscribed yet, right now is the moment. Hit subscribe. Turn on the bell so you get notified the second new cases go up. Share this video on your social media, in your group chats, anywhere. Because the more people who know Nolan's name, the more pressure there is on everyone involved to get this right. Share it for his mother. Share it for his father. Share it for every parent who has ever watched their child walk out the door and said a prayer they'd come back safe. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. He was a wide receiver, a son, a teammate, a leader. He cooked salmon for his parents the night before he left. He hugged his mother. He told her he loved her. He went with his group. He deserved to come home with it. Rest in power, Nolan. This channel will keep saying your name.